And welcome back. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Life in the West Burbs. Today, we are going to be doing a deep dive into the true cost of purchasing a home in the western suburbs of Chicago. Specifically today, we are going to be looking at purchasing a $500,000 home in Sugar Grove, Illinois. And make sure you stick around to the end where we can talk about a negotiating tactic with sellers to help reduce the cash you need to bring to the closing by tens of thousands of dollars. If you're familiar with this channel, my name is Ryan and I'm a local real estate broker here in the western suburbs of Chicago. And on this channel, we talk all things life in the West Burbs, from property home tours to real estate market updates to talking with business owners. And like today, talking about the true cost of purchasing a house in the western suburbs of Chicago. So what we're going to do today is we are going to dive in and look at not only what a payment would look like, but what kind of cash you will actually need to be able to close on a property, looking at everything from the down payment to the title fees and lender fees and all of that. So what we're going to start with here is diving into an actual estimate on a property. And the first thing that we are going to do is look at the payment. Now, in this example, this entire example and all of these numbers, we are factoring in a $500,000 purchase price, 20% down payment, which means you'll have a loan balance of $400,000. So when we're looking at the payment, when we're looking at the title fees, those numbers are all based off of these. And these are just estimates. It should get you a pretty good ballpark. Obviously, things like your interest rate will be different depending on your credit score and your debt to income. Your payment may be different depending on if you're putting less down payment down and you have PMI, private mortgage insurance, or if you're, doing bigger down payment or all cash. Things will look different, but this should give you a general cost idea, especially when it comes to the title fees and things like that. So on a $400,000 loan, figuring about a 7% interest rate, your principal and interest payment is going to be just shy of $2,700, $2,661 per month. Now, when you hear fixed rate mortgage and your mortgage doesn't change, that principal and interest payment is the payment that actually doesn't change. There can be fluctuations with the taxes and homeowners insurance, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that principal and interest on a 30-year fixed loan, that's what the payment is going to look like throughout the entire life of the loan. Now, there are things in here, as you can see here, taxes and homeowners insurance that are also part of your mortgage payment. This house, on a $500,000 house in Sugar Grove, the taxes are just a little bit shy of $12,000. So that's where this $974 a month onto the mortgage payment comes in. And then homeowners insurance, we're estimating about $2,400 for the year, which is where the $200 per month on the mortgage payment come into play. Now, this is assuming, and this is figuring that you are going to be escrowing your payment. With a 20% down purchase or owning the house outright, whatever, you don't necessarily have to have a escrow account. And then if that was the case, then your principal and interest payment would just be this $2,661. Now, a lot of people like to have the escrow account, even if they are doing 20% down or more, because it's large chunks of money that you have to come up with. So once a year, you'd have to come up with the $2,400 that is needed to pay that insurance bill. Twice a year, you'd have to pay, half of the tax bill. So in Illinois, the tax bill comes out in April. The first installment is due in May. The second installment is due in September. So you'd have to have the $6,000 in May and the $6,000 in September, which can be large chunks of money at one time. So most people are just like, hey, let me pay it as part of the escrow. The bank can hold it. The bank can pay it. And, I'll be happy to just have my normal monthly payment, and then the bank will take care of making those payments at the time of that. So with the principal and interest, the homeowner's insurance, the monthly property taxes that are going into the escrow, your total mortgage payment that you would make each month would be just shy of $3,900, $3,835. On a $500,000 house with a $12,000 tax bill, this is roughly what your payment will look like. Again, that could vary depending on down payment and credit score and all that sort of stuff. Now, the down payment is a huge chunk at 20% down, $100,000 down. But what else goes into the costs of purchasing a house? And that's what we're going to break down next. Now, remember the $12,000 tax bill, because that's going to be important here in a second. And it's also going to be important in a few minutes when we talk about how that can help reduce some of the cash you actually need for the closing. So the first thing that you're going to have as part of a closing is 14 months of insurance. So why 14 months? It's kind of an odd number. You, at the closing, have to pay 1 year of mortgage insurance, of property insurance up front. The full year has to be paid up front. So on this, it's $2,400. Now that extra 2 months, the bank's going to want to see a little bit of startup in that escrow account to cover the insurance for when it comes due the next year, the following year. So they'll have you put a couple of months in just to get it started a little bit, and then that protects them, and they know, okay, when this bill comes due in a year, there's going to be enough in the escrow account for us to be able to pay that insurance bill. So that's where the 14 months of the property insurance comes into play. Now you're also going to have to fund about 3 to 5 months. So for this example, we're going to do average of 4 months of property taxes if you're doing an escrow. And that is because the same thing, the bank wants to make sure there's enough in there when the property tax payment comes out, that they want to make sure, okay, I have enough in this escrow account that I can pay the bill, and then I don't have to go, back to the homeowner and ask for more money or balance the escrow and things like that. Now, they will still balance that escrow once a year, but when you're first buying the house, they pretty much know the tax bill, and then they want to see that money in there to start it and have a cushion for when it comes due, the following year. Now, there's also some days of interest that you are going to have to pay. This will vary depending on the day of the month that you purchase it. So when you purchase a house, and in this example, these costs are based off kind of a middle of August close date, and that'll come into play here when we look at some tax things here in just a few minutes. But middle of August close date, your first mortgage payment isn't actually due until October 1st. So the month you buy your house in, the mortgage payment, you skip the first month, and then your mortgage payment is due the first of the next month. So August 15th, mortgage payments October 1st. June 30th, your first mortgage payment is going to be August 1st, etc. You kind of always skip that first month. There are some rare instances where a lender might say, hey, it's more advantageous for your loan to just make that payment due on the first of the next month that you purchase it. It's a rare occasion, but sometimes lenders will use it as a strategy to just get you maybe a little better rate or some better closing costs or whatever when they are putting together the final loan package. But because you always have that month skipped, the bank's going to want their interest collected on their loan that they're putting out. So this 15 days of interest covers for that second half of August. If you were closing earlier in the month, it may be more days of interest. If you were closing later in the month, it may be, less days of interest. And then they will always, the bank always wins. So they're always going to get their interest. And that's where that comes from. So with those prepaid costs, you have your down payment, plus you have some prepaid costs of just shy of $8,000 to start your escrow account for insurance, start your escrow account for taxes, prepay that interest that the lender's going to want to see paid at the time of closing. Now there are also closing costs. There's some fixed costs that are involved. And on this next sheet, we are going to take a deep dive at what those fixed costs actually are. The first section of these is the title company. So when you go to purchase a house, the title company acts as the person who they collect all the money. They make sure the title is free and clear for you. They make sure all the numbers balance, and they charge a fee for that. So the title company is going to charge this closing fee. Now, this property, again, is in Sugar Grove, so this is a Kane County kind of title fee. It will vary depending on county. The further west you go, the little bit less the title fees get. The more expensive the house, the more expensive the title fees are. But at a $500,000 house in Kane County, this is about what you can expect to pay the title fee for some closing fees. Now, there's also a mortgage policy that you are going to have to provide. At the time of closing, the seller will provide you, the buyer, a title insurance policy that says, hey, we're insuring this house, that there's not going to be any liens pop up or any, unpaid labor or mechanics liens that pop up. We're giving you this policy to say, hey, everything's going to be free and clear. You as the buyer also have to cover your lender with a policy for a mortgage policy. So that's what this $595 is, to verify and cover the lender on any issues as well with the title company. And then when you have that title insurance in place, if something does pop up and, all of a sudden someone comes knocking at your door and say, hey, this was actually, my house that I was supposed to, sell, you have insurance in place for that to protect you, to make sure that your home and your asset is safe. Closing protection letter, chain of title, policy fee update. These are just small fees. I mean, there are a lot of small fees, but they do add up. These closing protection letters and this chain of title and policy update fee, that comes into play because we'll get the initial title work for a closing, probably 3 to 4 weeks before the closing, so the attorneys can start reviewing it. The lender can start reviewing it as part of their closing process. You're going to want to see an updated policy and closing protection letter at the day of closing, because if the initial title search was done and all the loans against the house were pulled 3 weeks ago, you want to make sure that no new loan was put on 3 days before closing. So the title company and the lender will require the seller to provide this letter saying, hey, you didn't put any new loans on it. They'll do another title search to make sure that no new loans were recorded against the house, and that's what those fees are. There's some wire transfer fees. This state registration fee cracks me up. Every buyer and every seller in every real estate transaction in Illinois gets charged $3. No one's really sure why. It was enacted, 10, 15 years ago. It's just on there, but the state of Illinois has it, and it's part of the closing costs. The seller also has to pay $3 for that. So total title costs come into just over $4,000 on average as an estimate of extra costs that you are going to have outside of those prepaids and outside of your down payment. Now, you're also going to have some lender fees. The lender is going to charge you fees. Now, this origination fee is an estimate. Some lenders may charge less. Some lenders may charge more. But it's kind of an estimate of what the lender is going to charge you for starting the loan, doing all the paperwork, having their team work on it, and all that good stuff. So this is just an estimate, but it is a cost that the buyer will then have to pay. Now, the appraisal is something that every house that gets a mortgage is going to have some sort of appraisal done. If you do like over 20% down, closer to 25, 30%, sometimes there's some appraisal waivers. But if you have a mortgage, it's going to run you between $400 and $500. $450 is what we're going to use as an estimate on this cost. But that is something that the bank wants to see, because they want to make sure that the money they're lending on the house is actually, the house is actually worth what they're lending against. So they'll order an appraisal. The buyer has to pay for it. A lot of times, and especially as things have changed over the past few years, the lender will require the buyer to pay for the appraisal when the appraisal happens. So we see it on this sheet here as a cost because it is a cost for the buyer, but a lot of times you're paying for it ahead of closing, and then it's not actually on the final closing statement. If you do have a lender that fronts it or gets the appraisal ordered and it's paid for at closing, you would just see it as a number at the closing. But more and more often, it is common for the buyer to pay for that at the time of the appraisal. They'll charge some small fees for, running your credit, having their underwriter do everything, having their processing team. So lender fees, this is probably a high estimate, but an estimate at least, and it's just going to be just a little bit under, $6,000 for some lender fees. Some lenders may be closer to $3,000, depending on their process and their departments and things like that. But as an average for a high expectation of cash you're going to need for closing and what it will cost to purchase a house, just shy of $6,000 for some lender fees. Now there's also some other, random fees. This Chicago water certification probably isn't going to be on there, although some municipalities will charge, to set up your water bill, or your account with, the water department and the city. So this is like an average of, the general areas on what you might expect. Recording fee, they're going to record the deed, give you that title and make sure that everything is actually owned by it. There's some other things. Now you also have an inspection cost. This is another cost that's going to be paid when the inspection happens, which could be anywhere from 30 to 45 days before the closing. So it's not going to be paid at closing, but it will be a cost that the buyer has, and it will cost around $600. Now that's if you want to do both the inspection and radon test. So $500,000 house in Sugar Grove, you are going to have a home inspection cost around $425. The radon cost is probably around $195, $200. So you'll be around $600, give or take, for an inspection. Now, if you decide to do a sewer scope inspection is going to be, another $225-ish, depending on the house and things like that. And then if you decide to do any mold testing, that can be kind of open-ended depending on what sort of mold testing you want to do, what needs to be addressed, what needs to be tested, how many samples need to be taken. So that will vary widely. But in general, the general home inspection and a radon test are going to be right between $600 and $650. Now you're also going to get a tax credit. So that's how this number here on these other fees gets to negative. When you purchase a house, so again, this is middle of August that we are saying this closing is happening. So when you purchase a house, the seller has to credit you for all the unpaid taxes. Typically, if we're after April and the tax bill is already out, the seller will just go ahead and pay the tax bills that are due, through the title company, because they know the tax amount. If you're before April and that, January kind of through March and the tax bill's not out, you get a big tax credit, or the title company may hold, some money back from the seller and pay the tax bill themselves. So this tax credit number could fluctuate. It could be higher if they have to credit, 13, 14 months of taxes, like would be the case on a February closing. However, then more than likely your lender is going to require more to go into your escrow account because they're going to have to pay that first installment. So you may not end up, with as much as you may think. But in general, on closing in August, that we're assuming the seller has to pay the second installment at the closing, and then you're going to get 7.5 months of a tax credit, which is a huge chunk of money from the seller. And the reason they give that is because when you go to pay the taxes next year, a large part of that is from when they own the house in the year that you are currently in. So when we get those negative fees, we'll go back up here to this where we have our fixed costs, our prepaid costs, give you the total closing costs plus your down payment. You're going to be right at $100,000 for $110,000, $766 and some change for total dollars needed to purchase a $500,000 house in Sugar Grove, Illinois. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there is a trick and a negotiating strategy that you can do to save you thousands of dollars, almost, in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars with the seller to help lower that bring to cash close need that you are going to need. So next, we're going to take a look at that. And here we have another example of an estimate and what we're going to need. As you can see, the monthly payments are the same. Principal and interest, taxes, that is all the same. But this cash to close has been reduced by $10,000, which is a huge swing. And how we do that is if you are needing some extra cash or you want to keep some extra cash in the bank, you can ask for a seller concession. So in this example now, we've asked the seller, hey, we will pay your price, but we want to also give you, have you give us $10,000 back at the time of closing. So that then can be used to, pay for your origination fee, pay for your appraisal, pay for your processing fee, pay for your title fees, and it drastically lowers your price or your cash needed to close. $10,000. On a conventional loan like this, you can get up to 3% of a closing cost credit from a seller to help with your closing costs. On an FHA loan, you can get up to 6%. On a VA loan, you can get up to 4%, and this is of the purchase price. So you can get some very large sums in a credit back from the seller to help alleviate that high cash to close amount. Especially with FHA and VA loans, it is a useful tool. If you're not putting a large down payment down or there's not a lot of cash funds there, you can use that as a way to get into a house with really only having about your down payment, right? After, if you get a big enough credit and, get into the house you love. And then on VA loans, it's great because you can actually get into a house with pretty much no money out of your pocket with their 100% financing and using a credit, to get money back from the seller. You can get into properties with close to $0 out of your checkbook. So that is the true cost of purchasing a house in Sugar Grove, Illinois, a $500,000 house with a $12,000 tax bill. It'll get you a monthly payment of just shy of $3,900, and you will need about $110,000 of cash to cover your down payment, your closing costs, your prepaid expenses, all of that, and of course $10,000 less if you are getting a closing cost credit from the seller in the sum of $10,000. So thanks for following along on this video. Make sure you like and subscribe as we continue to bring you updates on all things life and real estate in the western suburbs of Chicago. If you are interested to see what you could qualify for or what your payments would look like on a specific house in a specific area, make sure you click the link below and we can get you set up on that.